The Daily Now. The Daily Now is a podcast about being in the moment. It's a podcast about breathing. It's a podcast about presence. I record all the podcasts myself. My name's Alec Zafiro. This is my podcast, The Daily Now. Ooh, just starting with some deep belly breaths in the morning. Take one with me. Ooh, 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 ooh. Welcome back to The Now. The Daily Now is a podcast that is free of form. Free of form in the sense there's no restrictions. There's not even any really guidelines that we have to play within. There's nothing that we have to talk about here. There's no issues we have to solve here. There's no, we're not getting deep down on worldly things in this podcast. We're very much outside the realm of the regular programming, you could say. I was downstairs reading before I started today's podcast, and I'm rereading some of Tolle's, Eckhart Tolle. I'm rereading some of his work. I've never read anybody like Tolle or Tolle. I have never come in contact with such a potent, powerful idea. What does Tolle talk about? He talks about a dysfunction of the human mind that is prevalent amongst us as humans or humans, either one. What is this mind dysfunction? Well, it takes different forms. He gives some examples of the Christian mind dysfunction might be called sin. Original sin, to miss the mark. In Buddhism, amongst the Buddhas, they call it, I believe it's called dukkha, or spelled dukkha, but pronounced dukkha. It's essentially suffering. There's the ego. The ego is our minds labeling, identifying, thinking about ourselves incessantly, not even seeing the true world, but seeing labels, our mind labeling and pigeonholing, and this just constant stream of mind chatter. So Tolle talks about this baseline human dysfunction that essentially it's our own minds telling ourselves we are not enough. It all kind of boils back down to that simple phrase of we are not enough. And so it creates a lot of mental obstacles for us. And this has definitely been something that's true in my life. And I came in contact with Tolle's, Eckhart's work in 2021. I read The Power of Now. And I enjoyed it. I read it. I understood it. But it wasn't until I read it 2 years later in 2023 that it actually began to transform my baseline being. And so I give credit to his work, and I want to refrain. I want to avoid the mental mistake of me identifying it as my role is to communicate the value of his work. That's not my role. My role here, it's not to seem spiritual. It's not to appear to be any kind of way that you can imagine. No, no, no. That's not my role here. My goal with this podcast, The Daily Now, it's to be an example of being, of potentiality and consciousness. That's it. I cannot gerrymander how this will be received. I really, once it leaves the technology, I have really no control over what happens with it. And that's very freeing. But for the sake of this episode and this podcast, my hope is you see something in it, that you notice something in it, and that this is of great value to your outlook. You know, we are all only conduits of energy. And so we can all be conduits of the energy of the source of God. We can be godlike. We can be ungodlike. We could have presence, or we could have divided mental attention. We can love, or we can be loved. There's a lot of duality. If I could be a conduit of the source that is love, that is God essence, if I could be that for somebody else, wow, there might be a little iota of meaning in that. But that's not my role. That's not my role. I'm simply here, and so are you. Ooh. Deep belly breath right here. Watch this. Wow. Long exhale right there. The Daily Now.